the difficulties in assessing the legal significance of the value of the environment are mainly two. The first of all is the fact that the interest for the environment overlaps with other sectors, competences, and organization. And the second one is the territorial closeness among the territory that causes an environmental impact and the organization that manages it. So basically, during the years, we have seen a not in my backyard approach, meaning that the countries often have had the approach of not being interested in solving the problem, but making it solve to other countries, or also not having the tools to solve the problems. And these explain the strong supra-international connotation of the environmental laws. So how did the materialization of the interest for the environment evolve? So the transversality of the interest for the environment raised a scientific dogmatic question. So does the environment exist as a defined and separated object from others? And why do I ask this question? I ask this question because it means that, therefore, if the environment can be identified separately from other objects, then it can be identified as a subject of rights. So on an European level, it was not until the beginning of the 80s that there were a specific law for the environment. Until the beginning of 1918, there were only sector-specific law. For instance, in Italy, the first environmental-related law was in 1966, but it was sector-specific, and it was, for instance, against atmospheric pollution. Also in the Constitution, we could see the concept of protection of the landscape, but it was taken into consideration essentially for its aesthetic aspects, not for environmental specific consideration. In Italy, the increasing of the pollution started to increase the awareness of for the environmental problem, and it brought the birth of association to protect the environment. And in 1986, it brought to the institutional law for the institution of the Ministry of the Environment, with the ambitious objective of assuring the conservation, restoration of the environmental conditions. So it is a very important step in the Italian legislation, because it means that the environment is not anymore treated like from the point of view of many specific sectors, but it is treated as an object with a specific ministry that can address its problems and its questions. On a juridical level, therefore, the environment becomes to represent a subject. So, as a subject, it comes to assume an homogeneous set of competences on a legal, administrative point of view, and it becomes to have juridical centers and legally projectable, and it is protectable on a legally point of view. So now let's see more deeply the birth and evolution of the environmental law on an international level, on an European level, and on the Italian level. So, of course, firstly, it was the environmental law was formed internationally because the first problem that raised was that the territories that caused some environmental impact actually had impact not only in their own country, but in all the other countries and on an international level. Maybe the first most important step was the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972, which firstly affirmed some general but fundamental principles, such the human right to an environment that assures dignity and well-being. Also, it introduced the concept of future generation in sustainability and the importance of human being to preserve the environment for the future generations. Also, the duty of countries to not produce negative impact on outside their borders, and the institution of the first international organization with environmental competences. Another important step was the Brundtland Report in 1987, where it was defined the concept of sustainable development, such as a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own need. The concept had quite a large success, also because it is quite vague on a quantitative term, therefore it is largely applicable. And also the Brundtland Report affirmed the important concept of interdependence and multilateralism of nations. In 1992, we saw the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, which, as all of you know, had fundamental importance, and it established a few essential points, such the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities of the different countries, and the concept that the developed countries have the duty to spend bigger effort for a sustainable development. Also, it introduced the important principle, two important principles. The first one, the precautionary principle, that basically expressed the fact that in order to prevent harmful events, countries do not have to wait until they have the certainty of their occurrence. Why this is important? Because it represents the passage from the concept of burden of proof to the concept of environmental risk, and it will therefore be the base to the development of environmental risk assessment. Another very important principle that was assessed was the polluter pays principle, meaning, as the word says, that the polluter has the responsibility for the cost of this pollution. Still, some possible misunderstandings were introduced, because the possible misunderstanding was that maybe a country had the right to pollute if paying, but it will be clarified with other treaties and declaration after. Also, the conference produced three important documents. Between maybe the most important is the Agenda 21, which is of particular relevance because it basically gives the basis for the changes to apply in the following century, in the 21st century, on an environmental level. Also, it is of fundamental importance because it represents the tool that local administration can adopt in order to use let's say the fundamentals point of the Agenda 21 on a local level, and it introduces the concept and the importance of participation, meaning that the action has to be bottom up in order for them to be more effectively respondent to the needs of the local communities. There were a few other conferences of regional and European nature that has to be mentioned, such as the Geneva Convention for Air Pollution, the Convention of Environmental Impact Assessment in a Transboundary Context, the Aarhus Convention, and of course the Kyoto Protocol, which was particularly important because it pointed out the importance of the reduction of greenhouse emission and the and the fundamental relation among market and environment, assessing that in order to protect the environment, the world had to decrease the freedom of trade. On environmental, on the European level, the first measures were not very strict, but they were in the form of directive and regulation. And today, the protection of the environment can be found in the Treaty on European Union in the Articles 2, 3, 6, and 174, and it highlights that some principle of sustainable development, which we are about to see. These principles are the precautionary principle, the polluter pays principle, prevention principle, the principle that environmental damage should be rectified at source, and the intuition principle. The precautionary principle, meaning better safe than sorry, means that when the countries had to adopt the strategy of adopting measures, even though there is no certainty about an environmental risk, and it implied the implementation of cost-benefit analysis. The polluter pays principle was particularly important because it assessed some individual responsibilities of countries and of juridical individuals, and introduces taxes and charges for who pollutes and the responsibility for environmental harm. The prevention principle can be summarized in the sentence that it is better preventing than cleaning up, and it can find some example in the environmental impact assessment in Italian VIA. Then there is the environmental damage, the principle that environmental damage should be rectified at source, which means that basically damages should be dealt when they occur, and they should be dealt by the country, the person, the individual that causes them. And least but not least, the intuition principle. The intuition principle is particularly important because it introduces a holistic approach, meaning that all the policies should have the common objective of sustainable development, so that the environment should be taken into account when dealing with the policies at any level and of any kind. So let's see how these policies were received in Italy. So it was only in 2004 that the parliament delegated the government to the adoption of an environmental code, Codice dell'Ambiente, which is composed of 6 parts, 318 articles, and 45 technical annexes. So it is divided in 5 main chapters, and which are divided in the following way. The first one gives the procedure for the strategic environmental assessment, which in Italian is valutazione di impatto ambientale, so it's called VAS, and the procedures for the environmental impact assessment, which in Italian is VIA. The second chapter is about soil protection, combating desertification, water protection and water management. The third is waste management. The fourth is protection of air and reduction of atmospheric emission. And the fifth is environmental harm. So let's deep into the concept of environmental impact, because it is the basis of the Italian environmental legislation and of future sustainable development. Environmental impact is defined as any qualitative or quantitative change to the environment intended as the system of relation among the anthropic, natural, chemical, physical, climatic, landscape, architectural, culture, and economical as a consequence of the application on the territory of plans or programs, or of the realization of projects of facilities, public or private, and of their functioning. We will see the details of this definition very shortly. So which tools we have to deal with environmental impact? We have normative tools, which can be prohibitions or authorization, administrative tools, such as planning, and then VIA and VAS in Italian. Therefore, it's SEA and EIA on an European context. Then we have the economical tools, such as taxes, incentive, disincentive, and the market tools, which has particular importance in the field of eco certifications, such as EMAS, Ecolabel, etc. So let's see the concept of VIA and VAS, which correspond to CEA and EIA on an European level. So VIA is a technical administrative procedure aimed at the elaboration of an assessment of environmental compatibility for what? For a specific construction in a specific site. It first was introduced in the USA in 1969, then adopted from the European Commission in 1985, and then received in Italy in 1988. So there are two kinds of VIA in Europe. The first one is the mandatory VIA, which has to be applied for works which are higher risk, and such as environmental, health, social risks. And the list of this kind of works can be found in the Annex 1 to the directive. And the second is optional, and basically the single countries can ask for a VIA for the project with characteristics that should require it. And while in Italy, the criteria for the application of VIA is based on the specificity, the dimension, and the eventual particular sensitivity of a site. What is the objective of VIA? The objective of VIA is to protect human health, contribute with a better environment to the quality of life, to provide to the maintenance of species, and to preserve the reproductive capacity of the ecosystem, as it is considered an essential resource for life. Which is the target of VIA? The object of the evaluation of VIA is the direct and indirect impact of some project on the environment and on the cultural heritage. It can be administrated from the government if the project has a large-scale effects, from regions, whereas it has localized relevance. And in case of great public works, the final competence is of CIPE, which is an interministerial committee for economic programming. It has a few steps, which we are about to see. The preliminary phase is composed of screening and scoping. In the screening, it is established if VIA will be necessary for the project. In the scoping, there is a confrontation among private and administration in order to establish what to insert in the environmental impact assessment. The second phase is the conducting phase, where the environmental impact assessment is presented, and it has to contain a certain amount of documents, as it can be seen in the bullet in the bucket list in the slide. The third phase is the preparatory phase, and this phase is needed from the administration in order to gather the information for the decisions based on all the documents and all the technical evaluation developed. Then there are this is a phase in which the VIA procedure is concluded, and the MAT Commission, meaning the Commission of the Ministry of the Environment, expressed its opinion on the procedure, and the last phase is monitoring, where after the approval of the project, the possible further impact on the environment of the project are identified and monitored, and eventually the competent authority has the right to even suspend the work. The second procedure is VAS, which, as we saw, is the correspective on an international level to the CEA, to the EIA. So basically, VAS is the evaluation of the effect determined from plans and programs on the environment. So basically, VIA was for project of public or private works, while VAS is for plans and programs and its effects, their effects on the environment. So its juridical basis can be found in Italy or in the environmental code. There are many sections on which it can be applied, except for plans and programs that are of national defense, civil protection, or financial programs. Of course, the objectives are to contribute to a sustainable development of the country and to reduce the impact on the environment. And it can be administered from the government or the region, depending on the level of the competences for the plan and or program. The VAS as well has a few defined steps that has to be conducted. So it has as well a preliminary phase composed only by the screening phase, which establishes if VAS will be necessary, then a conducting phase, in which an environmental report is elaborated, where the main impacts on the environment can be found. And then a third step is a preparatory phase, where there is a public consultation, and this one is particularly important because it puts the highlight on the importance of public participation and of the public. So whoever wants to consult the VAS can consult it and can present their observation, whoever wants to consult the programs and the plans. can give their opinion on them. Then we have this decisive phase and the monitoring phase. So which are the main via-VAS relationship? The main common feature is that they do not address the environmental impact such as separate thing from all the national activities, but they actually deal with the environmental impact as a part of a greater and holistic procedure, such as productive activities. And the main distinctive feature is, of course, their object, their target. So VIA, as before said, is for project in a phase in which the possibility of, and it is applied in a phase in which the possibility of making a great change is not really high, whereas VAS is intended for plans and programs for a specific area of the territory. So let's see the main differences. VAS is a strategic type of action which is applied, of course, to plans and programs, while VIA is more of a construction management type of action, and it regards one project for one specific site. The time scale is different. The VAS is mainly quantitative, while the VIA is mainly quantitative. The extent of the impacts is different. So VAS, of course, regarding plans and programs, has a greater impact on national and regional level, while VIA, being, of course, project specific, is more local. The stringency of analysis is greater for VIA, while the output is more detailed for VIA and more general for VAS. The public perception. For VIA, actually, even though the participatory process is less important and less integrated in the procedure, the public is more reactive, because in general, a not in my backyard approach is followed by site-specific plans and projects. While in the VAS, even though the participatory process is enhanced and it is actually hopefully implemented in the procedure, the public is more distant from it, because it regards, it feels less its direct impact. The Commission of Evaluation of the VAS, of course, is public, while the VIA Commission is also private. Okay, so as I finish my presentation, I would like to present a couple of virtuous practices that apply the concept that we have seen of sustainable development and of the integration of the European fundamental principle into real plans in Italy. So the first one is the Piano di assetto del territorio della città di Padova. So this is an urban tool for a town in northern Italy, and it highlights the environmental sustainability, of the urban plan. And among the action proposed by the urban plan, we find the realization of green infrastructures with the goal of connecting the urban environment with the extra-urban and rural environment. So these can be an example of how the one of the objectives of the Agenda 21 is applied on a local level. So on the, for instance, the object 30 in this case, such as the formation of peri-urban green belt, not belt, sorry, but urban belt. made of a system of public parks and rural spaces, green paths, agricultural areas, ecological gardens, etc. So it is a perfect application of one of the objectives of Agenda 21. The plan was released also through a participatory process that defined the guidelines of the plan, such as the improvement of the planning and management process, the improvement of urban quality, and the reduction of the impact of climate change. And the important focus of this plan is that it was co-created and co-managed from institutions and citizens in a participatory process, and it developed 3 pilot actions, such as the e-management of green urban spaces through technology, both for the spreading of information and for urban planning. Second, the participation of the community, as above said, in the decision-making process. And third, the interest and commitment in creating new management tools for the urban areas. And more details about it can be found on this website. The second example is the Piano Operativo della Città di Prato. So it's an action plan, and it's called action plan, and it is a strategic communal plan, and the time scale is of medium and long period. Its main objectives are the definition of local sustainable development. So it basically aims to enhance the principle of the Agenda 21 for local sustainable development. And it also has an integrated and holistic approach, because it deals with cultural, social, economical, and environmental sectors and aspects. It aims to reuse the components of the city, and it consider the nature as a natural green infrastructures, also receiving the indication of the Agenda 21, and it connects the urban and rural area. How does it do it? Focusing on the reduction of soil consumption, the resilience to climate changes, and the maintenance of the ecological function of ecological soils and their protection. So the action plan basically reforests the urban and peri-urban area, and it connects them. And it is a good example of a virtuous practice, because also it is based on the principle of assuring a high quality environment for future generation and the interconnectivity of different sectors, as above said. So I hope that I did not take too much time, and I hope that this presentation was interesting for you, and I thank you very much for your attention. And you can email me to my email address, which is julia.benati.92 @gmail.com, if you have any question that pops into your mind, and I let the word to my colleagues. Thank you.